I'm Christopher C. York, instructor of philosophy at Langara College.
And I'm Zan Plesner. I'm a student at Langara College.
And this is Synthesis and Sophistry.
So, on today's episode of Synthesis and Sophistry, we're going to be discussing a huge topic in philosophy, free will versus determinism.
Not if I can help it.
Yeah.
You like the joke?
Yeah. If you don't know what the topic, or if you don't know much about the topic right now, listen to the podcast, come back afterwards. You'll get it.
Enjoy the joke.
Yeah, you'll get the joke. So in Philosophy Club the other day, we picked this as a topic because it's always a great topic for debating other people. Generally, people have fairly strong positions and intuitions on free will. I think there's a lot of implications from different positions, so people feel quite passionate about it. It's also very dry, though, in a lot of places. A lot of looking at language in a very particular sort of way. But yeah, it's an interesting topic for sure.
And I think the best way to dive in, as usual, is for you to tell us what were the high points of the debate during the Philosophy Club's meeting, and where did the discourse break down? In other words, what was the last stage of synthesis that you left things in?
So we kind of started out laying out the different positions, discussing each one. Maybe today we can do kind of what I wanted to do last time, and we started with. So I think in discussing free will, it's a good idea to start with the metaphysics, and then afterwards talk about the implications. So that's what we attempted to do, laying out the different positions. But in order for you to argue for a certain position, which maybe I'll just quickly define the three sort of different positions before we go any further. So you have three different positions in the free will debate. There's libertarian free will, and this is the view that we are the author of our own actions, and we are ultimately responsible for all the choices we make. This is kind of a traditional sort of view of seeing free will. And opposed to this is the view of determinism, in which we are just a part of one great big causal chain, and none of our actions are free in that sort of way. We don't choose what we do. We're determined to do so by previous causes. And the third sort of view is kind of in between those two, and this is compatibilism. It posits that the world is determined and we are determined as a part of it, yet we can still have free will or have choices. And along all those different positions, there's many, many different views. So that's kind of just blanket. I'm sure some people will take issue with my definitions, but
Right. Well, I think that's a pretty good, let's say, canvassing or survey of the landscape. And now I'm going to reveal my surprise topic, because I feel like philosophical discussions, they always blossom best when we tie it to real world experiences. So my girlfriend of a year and a bit, we broke up.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
This last week. Yeah, that's okay. But I want to discuss whether or not there was something that we could have done, or that I could have done, to salvage it, or whether it was just meant to fall apart, right? Because there's a lot of blame laying at the end of relationships, like you did this or you did that. Did either of us have any control over what we did, right? So the determinists just say, it's not really that interesting in a way. I feel like here's why I think determinism is not a great philosophical position, even if it's maybe the best scientifically backed of the three. it doesn't let you act or feel like a human being. Let's say that you're theoretically committed to determinism. I presume that you will still have some sense of agency and control over your life. You'll experience that, and it will grow and it will wane. And so I feel like determinism doesn't really describe human experience, right? It's not, even if it's true, it's the kind of truth that if you know it, it's not going to help you. It will either immobilize you and make you incapable of really doing anything at all if you take it too seriously, or if you take it seriously in a different way, you're free to do anything because, well, you can't take any responsibility for any of it. So why not do anything that comes to you? And so I feel like both of those, they either make us ethically null or they make us ethically monstrous. Either one of those is an undesirable outcome.
Yeah, I agree. I do think determinism has a number of flaws, but I do take some issue, I guess, with it, even if we want certain things to be true, if it's metaphysically true that determinism is true, then we should probably face the reality of that. And I mean, this is one of those things that we don't have a consensus on these sort of things. So maybe we can be a bit more choosy, but are you concerned that that might get in the way of that sort of
Well, okay, so you understand everything's determined and you live your life as you normally live your life, but you have the extra sort of stoic certainty that, whatever happens, it's okay. I suppose that's a sort of third path to either not doing anything or doing too much, would be like just the quiet confidence that knowing the world's mechanically determined. Yeah, I mean, that could be a possible response to that, but still, I think it doesn't speak to your personal experience, I don't think, because you can see that you influence the world. And just to see yourself as a billiard ball on the table with all the other billiard balls and, whatever happens, don't think too much about it, man, because it was going to happen anyway. That's a bit too ethically lax for me, I think. Not that I want to really bring down heavy. I'm not like so let's talk about the other undesirable position, right? So libertarianism.
You're just laying your cards right on the table.
Why not? I mean, we have limited time. It's a short podcast. We're here for 40 minutes.
Yeah.
So libertarianism for me is the position that says, maybe you have too much control. I mean, it doesn't acknowledge maybe all of the limitations that we do suffer, because we also have the feeling that we're not in control in important moments, right? We're, let's say that we take the material conditions to be applicable even in libertarianism. Like I can't will myself to jump to the moon, for example. That's not going to happen with the laws of physics as they are. I can't change those. And there's certain, let's say, biological facts about myself that I can't just wish otherwise. If I have cancer, for example, I can't positively think myself out of it unless, I mean, there might be some people that claim that's not true. I mean, I've had people speak about depression in such a way that they seem to think that it's the person's responsibility. Like, just be happy, man. Why can't you just be happy? Not to me personally, but I'm just saying, like, I've heard people approach depression in this way, which I think is just, it's a bit too easy. It's a bit too glib, and it is kind of victim shaming in a way, right? Like, if you just had a more positive attitude, you wouldn't have this affliction. Yeah. So I feel like that's too neat as well. So there has to be something in the middle. So I guess compatibilism probably doesn't satisfy a lot of people, but maybe it's the best compromise we can arrive at. And maybe that's what we do in philosophy. We arrive at compromises that don't make anybody happy, but are probably the closest to what we can understand as the truth of the situation.
Yeah, to me, it seems to be the most fruitful position on a number of fronts. I guess my problem with determinism is that it tends to over-explain everything. Oh, you did this because A, B, and C, and D. It's just not that interesting.
Well, yeah, I mean, so as I understand determinism, right, it's the idea that the present is caused by the past, and the future is caused by the present, and there's no way out of it. It's just like if we could have perfect understanding of the material state of the universe, nothing would be a mystery, and nothing would be therefore very interesting either. Like if I don't know, I'm a philosopher of sport. Let's talk about it in terms of like a game or a match. If you knew which boxer was going to win the fight, in which round, at which second, under which blow, maybe there's some point in watching the match, but I'm going to say that a lot of the joy that you would have normally gotten out of watching that match severely impinged upon by that knowledge.
This might be getting pedantic, but what about Rocky? I've seen that movie before, but it's still just as compelling. Maybe not just as compelling, but a really good movie. We know all the events that are going to happen in it, but there's something compelling about watching it multiple times.
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to the hermeneutic circle and the idea that, each time you watch Rocky, you'll have a sort of different enriched take on it, and you'll be in a different place in your life. But there's no going back to the first time you watched Rocky, right? That first engagement with the loved cultural product, right? That's going to have a sort of unique trace that subsequent watchings won't have. And I'm assuming that if you know the future, everything is a second watching, right? Everything, like you've already sort of intellectually, it's coming.
Yeah.
And then it's just a matter, well, I guess I can just go through the motions. And maybe there is some joy in that, I'm not sure, but I'm just going to say, like, it doesn't describe the feeling of power that most of us feel we have in shaping our lives, and the sort of moral practices of praise and blame that we rather, it seems, instinctively engage in. We don't like injustice, right? And we blame people that are unjust, and we praise pro-social behaviors, right? And we think that we have control over whether we're pro-social or not. And I think that without that, what are we doing? Yeah. Right? What are we doing here? Let's talk a little bit about determinism through the light of a subject we've both discussed before, which is existentialism. Right. So Jean-Paul Sartre, existentialism, the idea is that existence comes before essence. And you might think, what's he talking about existentialism for in this context? Well, I think that you can use the idea of determinism to sort of look at that claim. So his claim is that, well, no, you can choose your own essence, right? And, the first is the base fact of your existence, but that's not important. What's important is how you define yourself and choose your values after that point.
Mm-hmm. Just to interject really quick,
can
you
just
explain essence? Because the first time I heard that, I thought it sounded cool, but I had no idea what he was talking about. So
right. So there's different ways to use the word, but let's say that for the sake of our discussion today, an essence is a set of characteristics that a thing must have to be that thing. Right, so the essence of a chair, you say you sit in it. A piece of furniture you sit in. Right, the essence of a cat is that it has four legs and a tail, and there are obviously cats that lack a limb, but the base model has these essential characteristics. It has a form, right, in the Platonic sense, that the most members of that category partake in to be representative members of that class of objects or animals. So, yeah. So the essence that Sartre is talking about, right, is that you get to choose your values, and that's what matters, right? That becomes your essence. That becomes who you choose to be. But I think that he wipes over the difficulties that existence presents. Right. And so we are born into a human body. Mm-hmm. Most of us humans, I assume that's the way it happens.
Besides you lizard people out there.
Exactly. So let's say that, you're born with a certain disposition to behave in characteristically human ways, and you have a digestive system, and you have chemicals in your brain, and a lot of the things that you do in your early life, at least, will be almost exclusively dictated by that, species being, or that organic composition that you pre-reflectively are, right? So before there's an essence, there is an existence, but that existence, maybe, Jean-Paul, is also essenced in some ways, right?
Yeah.
Human mothers don't give birth to squids, right? They give birth to other humans. So, there does seem to be some sort of essence there, right? So I think that, the fundamental existentialist point, it does seem to be a sort of reality denial at a certain level, right? It's saying, but of course, it's a philosophy of freedom and self-definition. So of course, it has to kind of minimize that consideration, but that's still there, right? And so I think that maybe, we have the existence, we have the phenomenal isness, right, of sort of being in a space or whatever. But the way that we are in a space is determined by our panoply of sense organs and how they filter back through the brain chemical soup and are processed as experiences.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's why I like compatibilism more as a theory, because it kind of takes into account your historical context you're born into, your human body, things along those lines. I guess while we're on the topic of existentialism, for me, now that we've tossed both libertarianism and determinism completely in the garbage, what sort of free will are we concerned about? For me, one paper I like a lot, it's been a while since I read it, so I might need some help to remember it, but Harry Frankfurt talked about
philosopher with the best name, by the way.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Yeah. Because of the hot dogs, or?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Sure. Yeah. He
also some of the best book titles, right? I mean, On Bullshit.
Yeah.
And just great branding.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Definitely.
So go on about the paper.
Yeah. So he laid down a sort of conception of freedom that I thought was important and useful to think about how we can have free will through cultivating certain habits or certain behaviors, and how, for example, if I drive drunk and I kill someone, I might not be responsible in that moment for my action, but leading up to it, if I'm the type of person who continually goes out and gets drunk and keeps my keys on me, there is a sort of freedom in that, or there's choice in that I've made over and over to build up this habit of who I am and what choices.
Yeah. So the habit is determining at a certain point, but you also have a role in forming that habit.
Yeah, you put it very well. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough to say. And people who behave viciously, they do have to take some responsibility for their behavior, in the sense that they could have broken the pattern of behavior. They could have thought about things a different way. And if they couldn't have, then our practices of blame are completely off center. But I mean, I think when we talk about, I want to bring it back just a little bit, even beyond habit, to a more basic level. And then I'm going to sort of bring up why I talked about the split from my ex-girlfriend. Okay, so she had a delicious scent.
Okay.
Yeah. So I would smell her any chance I could get, and I couldn't get enough of that. And so I'm sure there's something about pheromones in there. I'm sure that there's something completely accidental about that smell. And I was recently watching the Reluctant Traveler with Eugene Levy.
Okay.
And he went to Finland, and he learned about a curious practice. So at a certain point in their history, Finnish women would put unbaked bread under their armpits, and presumably other places, where their pheromones could leak into the bread. The next day, they would serve it to their intended future husband. And if he liked the bread, if he really enjoyed it and ate the bread, it was a sign that their union would be blessed. It would be all full steam ahead for this relationship. And if he complained, it was over. Yeah. So there's something, right? There's something I'm assuming that is, morally neutral. It's just a fact of nature, whether you like somebody's smell or not, right? Now, let's talk about the other example. So I worked for a while at King Saud University in Riyadh. When I worked there, I was casually dating a lady. I believe that she was from Hungary, if memory serves. Not that that's essential to the story, but it's incidental. A little bit of color. And, she was a charming lady. She was, desirable in the ways that you would find somebody desirable to be with. And however, one thing, her scent, when let's say confronted up close, smelled like a high school gymnasium at the basketball finals. All right? And so, it was early enough in the relationship that could be a deal breaker, I think. Yeah. Right? But that's not her fault, presumably. Assuming that she'd taken the hygienic precautions as a prelude to being close with another person, she can't be blamed for that. So, in other words, like, I stopped seeing her in some part because of that. So, am I to blame for this, right? And so, again, let's say, for instance, that to my ex-girlfriend in the recent past, my scent was either neutral or bad, right? Maybe I am in a similar situation to this Hungarian lady, right? Maybe there's something completely non-moral that neither of us could control, right? It's just that the chemistry or the pheromones just weren't right. Let's say that's one possible explanation. I'm not saying it is. I think I take better care. I can smell when I'm funky and I can smell when I'm not. I think I'm, generally speaking, and you can confirm or disconfirm this for our audience, Zan. Am I a kind of person that smells badly often?
No, I've never been offended by your smell.
There you go. You heard it here first, folks.
Yet.
So well, we do have a considerable distance, but
by design. It's a safeguard.
It's by design.
Yeah.
We've chosen this arrangement in the studio for a reason. Now, again, this is just one possible theory, right? Let's say that if I'm not, if I don't have the kind of scent which actively drives people away, what if I don't have any smell? What if there's no delicious scent? Right? What if there's just nothing there? What happens then? Right? And so is that something you can blame somebody, right? Like, let's say, why did you stop seeing Patricia? Well, she didn't really smell like anything in particular. Is that a morally defensible reason to stop seeing somebody? Or again, are we beyond morality, right? Is there something so primitive here going on that and again, this is borne out by psychology, right? They had a T-shirt test they did in a psychology lab where they had like T-shirts that were worn by men, and they were given to female subjects to smell, and they would rate which T-shirts that they found the best smelling, and then they were introduced to the men who had worn the T-shirts, and invariably, or very close to invariably, the female participants would have a stronger emotional connection to the guy who wore the T-shirt whose smell they liked.
Yeah.
So there's a lot going on here, right, in the background with pheromones. And I'm going to say that, like, probably it has a lot to do with how successful the relationship is. So are we going to say that at least our romantic relationships are dictated by determinist factors?
Yeah. I think this is an interesting case because I think to some extent, yes, very much so. Especially initial attraction to people. It's not really something that we're in power of we can't really decide what we're attracted to, but as we get to know the people, I guess the this is
There's things that we can forgive.
mm,
There's
yeah.
things that aren't essential. And
Yeah.
there seems to be some things that aren't negotiable.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess maybe we're determined to be attracted to certain people, and once we start relationships in that, or maybe within those parameters, that's where our free will kind of comes in to decide how we want to go about pursuing this person, what sort of relationship we want to build together. I hesitate to say that my relationships are wholly dependent on smell.
Right. I mean, it would be odd if they were completely scent dependent, but it would also be equally ridiculous to posit that you could choose to love somebody despite all of the phenomenological triggers being unpleasant.
Yeah.
Right? No, I look past the scent and the sight and the sounds and everything, the texture of my, beloved. I've chosen to ignore all these factors and still pursue a relationship.
Some people do, and it never turns out well.
I find, that just seems to me, that's poor judgment, I think, or there's something strange happening there. Are you sure that you know people like this?
Well, maybe they have the initial attraction, but maybe once metaphorically their scent is no longer attractive to them, they hold on to something that used to be there.
Okay, well, that's different.
Okay.
Right, but if you just bloody-mindedly choose somebody who you find horrific,
yeah, no.
right from the very beginning, and like you choose them because you find them horrific, right? It may be even, right? Just to prove to yourself that you're not an animal and that you are in charge of your own desires. You're a libertarian, right? Like
yeah.
Any deterministic. As soon as I feel any deterministic pull towards a partner, I resist at that point, and I say no, base nature. I choose who I'm with. For completely non-deterministic. Anytime I feel myself being irrationally persuaded, in any way, I just put the brakes on.
This caricature helps the position for sure. It helps to flesh it out. That's interesting, and
that's the sophistry bit.
Yeah, there we go.
Persuaded you to take my point without any real argumentation going on. But maybe the example is a kind of reductio.
Yeah, I think, but a useful one, I think, for what I had in mind. So, yeah, I think it's helpful. And it seems like one reason I like this example is because love is such an important aspect of our life. And it's something that if we could think about rationally and make free decisions about, we would want to, since it does involve so many aspects of who we are and life in general.
Yeah, so here's the question, right? And this is a sort of general question, not necessarily about my relationship, but about everybody's relationships. When are we free, quote unquote, to end things, right? So some people might feel like, okay, so maybe I'm not materially determined to keep this relationship going, but there might be some sort of social pressure, or there might be a sort of weight of a commitment, or maybe some sort of sunk cost fallacy reasoning going on in the background. Let's say, for example, when is it more or less dead in the water, and when should we keep going, right? So presumably the choice to end something, we think it's a choice. Maybe it's not always a choice. I don't know. Like, do we have a choice when we end things? There's that song, you've lost that love and feeling. When you've lost that love and feeling, you can't really control when you lose that love and feeling, can you? Mm-hmm. Right? And it doesn't matter who lost it. You're not going to win back the relationship through rational debate. That's a horrible position to be in. The best you're going to do is revive the relationship for another couple of weeks, and you're basically fighting a losing action. Right. You might put the relationship on some sort of life support, but it's over. At the time when somebody wants to go, or somebody feels like they have to go, they're gone. Mm-hmm. Really. And protesting is pointless. Debating is pointless. Having the best philosophical position sadly, doesn't work.
You've been there.
Oftentimes it just makes things worse, alienates them even more. Right? I've got the philosophical high ground. Well, I'm still leaving. Well, all right, then, but I'm right.
You're writing things down on the whiteboard, showing the logical contradiction.
Exactly. Yeah, and believe me, in this situation, there were some logical contradictions, but pointing them out didn't make a whit of difference.
Really? Wow.
Breaking news.
Yeah.
But here's the more general question, right? Is if do we have any agency over when it's time to go? And so, or are we just puppets in this way? Like when the loving feeling goes, some people think, okay, now it's time to put more work into the relationship. But maybe some people who are along a more determinist bent would say, well, you can't really control those feelings. If you don't feel like pistachio ice cream, there's no point of forcing yourself to eat pistachio ice cream. So what are you still doing there if you don't have the feeling that made you go there in the first place? If you know what I mean.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is why I like the compatibilist view. There's varying levels of freedom with it. So when it comes to relationships ending, the two people might not be able to control that, but there's ways about going about it that can make the situation either better or worse by holding on to it for too long. I think you can make that situation worse. So even if you can't control how you feel about each other in a romantic way, there is some room in that to act on those feelings. Kind of going to the Stoic view of free will, right? You don't control your emotion, your feelings come up. You can't bring your feelings about, but you control how you react to them.
Right. And I feel like, this is maybe where we come back into having full knowledge of the way things will turn out. Like so many times, you're not in a position to know whether it's a lost cause or not. Right? And this might just be like a optimist, pessimist kind of difference, right? If you're an optimist, maybe you have this belief that you could rescue the relationship, right? By some heroic action or saying the right thing in the right way at the right time. And if you're a pessimist, you might just say, well, no matter what I do, it's over. Right? So, I mean, there's that might, but is it just our attitudes towards events that is determinant of the outcome? Or is there a truth of the matter, right? Are some relationships just doomed? Based, again, on things that are largely outside of our control? Or is every relationship, in theory, rescuable with the application of goodwill and intelligence?
No. This brings up to mind one of my favorite movies, Eternal Sunshine of a Spotless Mind. These two people have their memories erased from each other after they've been in a long, tumultuous relationship. Anyways, spoiler alert.
For a movie from the 90s.
Yeah. At the end, they can both see how the relationship is going to go if they are to do it again. They, at this point, have their memories wiped, but I'm forgetting it. But
maybe you had the procedure.
Yeah, maybe. But they can see that they both get files on each other, and they can see where this relationship is going to go, but they still choose to go into that relationship anyways because it's valuable to them. And I think there's something about that where they know all the kind of determined ends of it, but they still have it's still meaningful, and there's freedom within it, I think.
But isn't that just like the kind of story that we tell ourselves because we think that things couldn't have been any different? And so we just kind of say, well, I'm glad that I've suffered all of my, downfalls and humiliations and failures, because now I'm at this place where I really understand what failure and humiliation and disappointment really are. And that's a better place to be than not having knowledge of all this valuable stuff that if I just had a successful, wonderful life, I would never have learned all these important lessons. That seems to me like a bit of sour grapes or maybe sunk cost fallacy reasoning, right? Can't we just accept that things would be better if our relationships weren't so tumultuous? If they, if we could go back in time and say, look at a relationship and say, okay, in retrospect, I see now that was completely doomed. Wouldn't it be better to invest our energies elsewhere, given that human lives, they're finite, right? And we only have a short amount of time to lavish on each other.
Yeah, but
it's better to have loved and lost than not to have loved at all, right?
Yeah.
Is that your position?
To some extent. I mean, if it's truly a toxic relationship that is going to make both people's lives worse, then yeah, you should probably never do it in the first place. But I don't think in order for a relationship to be a good one or a meaningful one, it always has to be happy. I mean, it should be probably more of the time than not, but the relationships in our lives that are most meaningful usually aren't all rainbows and butterflies. And I guess the plot in the movie kind of spoke to me on that level rather than, if it's a toxic relationship, don't stay in it. You probably want to get out of it and look for more fruitful things in your life. But
taking the bold stance.
Yep.
Taking the bold stance.
Hey, it's what I'm known for. Platitudes.
But it sounds like maybe inherent in your discussion is that you are defending a certain degree of toxicity, right? You're saying like, well, the best relationships aren't just rainbow and sunshine, and maybe we need to have an admixture of the good and the bad to have a significantly textured relationship. But again, this takes us a bit farther away from the point of free will and determinism, which I'll try to bring us back on course with. Right. So my original question, which we strayed from, was let's assume that we have some exercise of free will. And that we do, take some moral praise or moral blame rightly for our actions. Ending a relationship is a pretty serious thing to do, right? It's a choice that you shouldn't make flippantly or hastily, right? Presumably, right? So let's say that we predictably do damage other people's interests and happiness when we pull the rug out from under them. Let's say, for example, this is not a romantic example, but let's say that, Zan, I said to you, you know what? This is the last episode of Synthesis and Sophistry. And I don't care what you say. I've made up my mind, and that's it. I'm drawing a line under the series. But maybe you'd hoped to carry it on through the summer. In fact, maybe we made plans to carry it on at least through the summer. Then that's a betrayal, right? Of a certain kind. It'd be a surprising betrayal. In the same way, when I discovered the rug had been pulled out from under me, presumably. Now, so the question here is, is there a set of conditions or prerequisites that we have to fulfill in order to leave a relationship in a right way? What do we owe other people under these circumstances, if anything? And remember, I'm the guy that said, just by a person smelling the wrong way or not smelling at all, we might have sufficient reason to leave. But presumably that's like at the early stages. Presumably we weed out the people that we could reject for surface reasons at the very beginning. And given that this relationship, which I'm bringing up in the spirit of, because it's current events and also because it speaks to our theme, having spent over a year with a person, you might think that after that investment of time, something more needs to be said in order to justify the rupture. And if so, what could you say? Does anything need to be said in order to justify it? Or are we just free at any time to just say, well, later?
Yeah, it seems, I think in order to not catch the other person off guard completely, you do need to have some sort of reason. You can't just say, I don't know, I just don't feel like it anymore, right? That's not a good enough reason. It generally, Yeah, it is things outside of our control that are understandable.
It's not you, it's me.
There you go. And I'm the one with the platitudes. Yeah, it makes it more understandable, I think, when there's just something incompatible about the two people and they can both recognize that. It seems easier almost if both people can understand that these things are at some level outside of their control.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that a discovered incompatibility is one way to sort of explain it, right? And say, look, when we started out, we weren't thinking this far down the road, but we've discovered something, and this thing is something that, I can't deal with, or you can't deal with, or we together can't deal with it, and so we're folding up shop, right? And that's fair enough, right? Assuming that it's actually it's an actual thing, right? That you can both understand. That seems to be a good reason. I keep seeing you, but it's illegal to date in this country due to a sudden shift in laws, right? And that might be something that the partner has to sort of suck up at that point. So, well, yeah, I know the laws are changing and you can't date me according to the law. And I get that. And I respectfully accept your position. I mean, but maybe, right? There's a part of us that, even though we get it, I think that we still have a tendency, some of us at least, to feel aggrieved, right? Like we feel like, even though in our relationships, at least in my relationships, I always say, look, you don't owe me anything, right? Everything is wonderfully volitional and voluntary, and I wouldn't want it otherwise. And if it is otherwise, I pack it up and end it. There is part of that, but then there's the other part of me that says, hey, wait a minute. I put in all this time and effort and lavished with attention, and now I'm on the side of the road. I've been kicked to the curb. So there's part of us that maybe feels that maybe something is owed, even though on paper maybe we're not owed anything at all. Maybe the universe is just, from a deterministic point of view, just atoms catapulting through the universe, and we aren't owed anything because there is no greater structure to reality. So in that sense, I guess, yeah, you can arrive at this sort of stoic acceptance of everything that happens to you. But I feel like there's another part of lived human experience that's separate from that. We're not all Mr. Spock from Star Trek, right? We don't all just say, it's illogical to feel. Obviously, Jim, if you get broken up with, it's illogical to feel jilted. That doesn't help us, mere mortals.
Yeah, I have friends like that. Just, oh yeah, man, it's just you guys didn't work out. That's all there is to it. Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you have to admire their ability to rise above other people's pain.
Yeah. Maybe I'm not that friend.
You're that friend?
I might be.
Yeah, we're coming to a sort of new level of self-awareness through the podcast. I feel like we've
synthesis.
There we go. We've accomplished something. We've made a breakthrough for Zan, at least in this podcast.
That's what I'm here for.
To have breakthroughs?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well. And obviously, I'm here for some sort of rehash of the overexplored, free will determinism debate, and also some sort of post-traumatic couples counseling. So I guess we're all here for our own reasons. We're all getting, what we came here for. Hopefully our audience is getting something out of it as well.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I sidetracked you there.
No, it's fine. We were going back to, let's say that, if we have a choice of when we end things. I'm not saying that we do. There might be circumstances that arise that make it a foregone conclusion. You've both lost that loving feeling. If that's happened, well, yeah, there's no point. There's no point at all, presumably. I mean, just for the sake of efficiency, it'd be easier to find new people for both of you that you could feel loving feelings towards, right? But assuming that at least one person in the relationship still has a loving feeling and the other person until recently had a loving feeling, is there anything we can do about that? Anything we should do about that? And you're saying that maybe at least we owe an explanation, right? It would be psychologically cruel to just ghost somebody you've seen for over a year, not answer their calls, delete their emails, whatever. Maybe it's necessary psychologically in some situations, but you're still probably doing some harm to the other person.
Yeah.
Right. It's a bit like, I don't know, this is probably a bad analogy, but you've got a pet and you feed it every day and you clean its litter box. And then one day you just don't come home and you don't return to that house ever again. Not fair to the pet, right? The pet's going to probably suffer, not only physically, but psychologically as to like, well, this had worked out pretty well so far. And in fact, I'd come to rely on the other person. And now none of my needs that were being met before are being met anymore. And I mean, the tendency is like, well, what did I do wrong? Or what happened to the other person? There's mystery there. And maybe part of, I guess what some people call conscious uncoupling is coming to some mutually acceptable version of why things ended up the way they did.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one lens I like to view relationships with is social contract theory, because when you enter into a relationship with someone else, it is kind of like an unwritten contract, which is the least sexy thing ever.
Yeah, partners love to hear that.
Oh, yeah. We're signing a contract.
It's a social contract, baby. Here I come.
But
I hope you've done your first year, political philosophy readings, because we're about to go Rousseau with this.
I do think it's helpful, though, to view it under that in some light, because then you understand both people have certain expectations that are baked into it, and communicating these expectations can really help out. And if we have a contract for me to come over and walk your dog once a week, if I just call you up one day and said, Chris, I'm not coming, I'm having a pizza party tonight, that's kind of a crappy reason. But if I came along and I just said, Chris, this isn't working, your dog is just too strong for me, he pulls me along, you'd be better off finding another dog walker.
A more buff dog walker.
A more buff dog walker.
Yeah, that's fair.
Or maybe you find a smaller dog, I think that's more understandable, and being honest about those sort of situations rather than getting pulled along by the dog.
But again, that's something you discover in the first week of dog walking, not like 1 year in. Unless the dog's really been working out.
Maybe the metaphor isn't working, but
right. Let me give you another example then. This is where you get to hear the dating history of your instructor, for better or for worse.
I'm all for it.
Yeah, good. Yeah, it's added value to the podcast. So I was dating a woman in Japan, and again, this was a relationship that lasted over a year. It was probably like a year and a half. And at a certain point in the relationship, she said, "Well, I think I'm a man." That's a difficult one. Yeah. Right? The behavior was the same. The person was the same in all of the ways, other than this, like, again, this choice that seemed to have been made, right? Because it didn't exhibit itself in the way that we interacted with each other or how they presented themselves to the world. It was just a thing that was posited. Right? Now, presumably, I could say, well, at that point, given that you feel this way, we oughtn't be together, I guess. After investigating the details and the connotations of all that, but because it never actually made a difference, we just kind of went on as if it wasn't anything different. It was a distinction without a difference, right? Nothing was really acted on, but still, the relationship faltered for possibly different reasons, right? But I guess at that point, again, this is getting, if somebody changes, right? If it wasn't just a distinction without a difference, if it was a distinction with a difference, and everything else started to change at that moment, then you'd say, okay, well, the deal's changed, right? There's something about this situation. I didn't contract into, according to your social contract model. The terms of the contract have changed, and you might want to, at a certain point, nullify the contract. Now, if you're a big-hearted and adventurous person, I would encourage you to stay on with that and maybe just ride that bull and see where it goes, right? maybe there's a whole exciting new range of experiences for you that await with someone who's going through this kind of awakening in their lives. I don't know. But for most people, when this kind of declaration is made, it's a serious enough thing that they can justifiably say, look, if we have control over this, and you don't have control over how you feel, but I have control over how I react to it, I choose not to be in this anymore. I think that's okay. And I think I think most people in this situation would have to be like, well, that's sad that our relationship has to end, but I get it because I've changed into something very different, from what you'd originally contracted into. God, I think I'm talking about midlife crises now by proxy. When you met me, I wasn't balding, but now that you begin to see my pate appear from under my rapidly thinning hair, I see that you're having second thoughts about all of this. And maybe that's okay, right? Maybe that's I don't know. Is the absence or presence of hair, is that something that we can predicate the continuation or discontinuation of a relationship on? You've got a lovely mustache. The audience can't see it. And let's say that your partner values you, at least in part, because of your luxurious, well-groomed mustache. Yeah. And you decide to shave it one day. And they hate it. And they say, look, you have to grow this mustache back or it's over. Is that kind of ultimatum justifiable? Like, are you causing them? Like, so you're in control with your choice over whether your mustache is there or not. It's something you can control, presumably. So given that you have that control, are you then responsible for their concomitant attraction or repulsion to your bodily state?
Yeah, no.
You're not.
I wouldn't say so.
So they can suck it up, or they can, make a big thing of it. Like, maybe my partner could grow a beard. It's a small beard. It's just a little soul patch. But I might say, well, that might be a bit of a deal breaker, right? That might be like, well, I find that hideous, actually. And I'd rather you not. Even though you do have the ability to grow a soul patch, I strongly disprefer it. And if you do this, it's actively antagonizing to me if you insist on having a soul patch, darling.
As long as they don't join a new metal band, then I think we're all good.
That's the deal breaker for you. New metal.
Yeah, well, with the soul patch.
Oh, with the soul.
Yeah,
you're a very tolerant partner.
Yeah.
You tolerate the soul patch
try.
Or the rock, but not both.
No.
In combination.
No. Well, I think we've hit a few twists and turns this podcast.
We have indeed.
I like the framing though, because free will can sometimes be very dry. So I think this was helpful to bring some color into the discussion.
Okay, well, I think if we've landed on the position that compatibilism is the best explanation of how we interact with the world as we find it, then I think that we have to approach our social, political, ethical lives with that framework in the background. Otherwise, we can't really speak about responsibility and agency as being both present and also limited by all these various factors. Right. So we talked about, things like materially determined likes and dislikes, smells or tastes that we can't seem to change our repulsion or attraction towards. We talked a little bit about, being legally compelled or having our agency circumscribed by regulations or social mores that are in place. That's a different sort of lighter layer of, let's say, diminishing agency. And maybe, the lightest touch of all is these kinds of abstract considerations, right? So like, will this partner be suitable to my peer group? Will they have the right approach to, which banking investments we select. Will they tolerate my choice of the shade of automobile that I desire? And this seems to me like the further we get away from, let's say, really heavy physical and biological constraints, and away from strongly and subtly coercive cultural and legal restrictions, when we start to just look at like preferences as the basis for tearing apart a relationship, at that point it does seem a bit frivolous, right? Because I think that, relationships are the kinds of things that are extremely valuable to human flourishing.
Mm-hmm.
And good relationships are exceedingly rare.
Mm-hmm.
And so to tear apart a good relationship for aesthetic reasons or some, abstract goal-based reasons
Mm-hmm.
seems to me to be flippant and short-sighted.
Yeah, definitely. I guess, this is kind of, again, where our wiggle room or our control within determined factors comes in, and how we orient ourselves within those sort of things, and build up habits around, I guess, caring for the other person in the relationship or being attentive to certain things. I guess that's where the sort of important sense of free will comes in.
Right. And I guess that's the sort of happy ending to the story, right? Is that each unsuccessful relationship that we live through, right, presumably gives us the keys to being a better partner in subsequent relationships, or at least appreciating the relative stability of new relationships, right? So we can enjoy those goods moving forward. So it's not it's not life or death. It's not all or nothing. Like we do gain some agential tools moving forward, right? Like, well, that didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I'll stop doing that. Right? I mean, otherwise we're all doomed, right? I mean, otherwise it really is. If without the sort of like belief that we have the power to reflect on our actions and revise our beliefs and behaviors, we really are just robots enacting patterns on each other and with each other. And that's not an inspiring model for human relationships.
Yeah, and I don't think it maps onto real life either. Obviously, we learn from our experiences and we grow as people, hopefully, or grow or do the opposite throughout our lives due to things we've experienced outside of our control. Yeah.
Well, it's springtime. Time to throw some mulch on our gardens, and he would say a young man's mind turns to something in spring. I don't know.
It sounds nice, whatever it is.
Yeah. More platitudes.
Yeah.
That's what.
That's the sophistry part.
That's the sophistry part. So we hope that this has been an enjoyable discussion for you, our listeners, and that you come back for more platitudes and maybe some more philosophical analysis and ramblings next week.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for listening, and write into us about your relationship troubles, and maybe we'll give some advice on there.
I think I'm probably more qualified to speak to other people's woes and pains than my own. I think I have better advice as a sort of like neutral third party. So, yeah, please do write in. Add to our ever-growing mailbox, our bulging mailbox that we will start to explore when we hit that crucial mass.
All right. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Zen.